Between 2021 and 2024, 11 of world's most advanced physicists and aerospace engineers, not retired, not reassigned, not dead, of natural causes, disappeared. Some vanished without explanation, some died under circumstances their families refused to accept, some simply stopped existing in any traceable public record. They came from different countries, they worked at different institutions, but they were all working on the same category of research. And that research, according to several people who knew them, was beginning to show results that certain organizations were not prepared for the world to see. I am going to tell you who they were, what they knew, and why their disappearances form a pattern that is impossible to dismiss as coincidence. What you are about to hear is drawn from public records, news reports, the testimony of colleagues and family members, and documents that have been made available through Freedom of Information requests. This is not anonymous rumor. These are real people with real names, real credentials, and real research portfolios. By the end of this video, you will understand the specific technical area their work overlapped in, why that area represents the single most strategically valuable scientific domain in human history, and why anyone who gets close to a breakthrough in that domain becomes, based on historical precedent, a liability. I am going to be careful and precise, because when the topic is too serious, imprecision is a disservice to the people who disappeared. But I also want to be very clear about something before we begin. Throughout history, there have been cases of scientists whose work attracted powerful and dangerous attention. The story of Frank Olson, who was a CIA scientist thrown from a hotel window in 1953. The story of Robert Oppenheimer, whose security clearance was stripped at the height of his influence. The history of Nikola Tesla, whose laboratory burned under unexplained circumstances and whose papers were seized by the FBI the night he died. These are not conspiracy theories. They are documented historical facts. The precedent exists, and it is that precedent that makes what happened to the 11 researchers in this video so significant. To understand the significance of what these scientists were working on, you first need to understand why certain categories of physics research attract institutional attention of a very specific kind. In 2017, the Pentagon officially acknowledged the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, known as AATIP. This was a classified program that had been running since at least 2007, funded through the Department of Defense. Its stated purpose was to assess threat posed by unidentified aerial phenomena. But the research it commissioned went far beyond simple threat assessment. The ATIP contracted research reports on topics including warp drive physics, negative energy density, manipulation of spacetime, exotic repulsion systems, and inertial mass reduction. These are not science fiction concepts. Warp drive has been a subject of legitimate peer-reviewed physics since Miguel Alcubierre published a mathematically valid warp matrix in 1994. His paper showed that general relativity does not forbid faster than light travel. It requires it to be achieved by a warping spacetime or on a spacecraft rather than accelerating through it. The energy requirements of the Alcubierre drive as originally proposed were impossibly large, but subsequent refinements by physicists, including Harold White at NASA's EagleWorks laboratory, have reduced those energy estimates dramatically. Inertial mass reduction, the ability to alter the effective inertia of an object through electromagnetic field manipulation, has been studied in classified and unclassified contexts. Dr. Bernhard Heisch and colleagues published peer-reviewed work suggesting that inertia might arise from electromagnetic interactions with quantum vacuum. If inertia is not an intrinsic property of matter, but an emergent effect, then It might in principle be redeceit or manipulated. In 2019, a series of patents filed by the U.S. Navy were made public. These patents describe a technology that represented a significant departure from anything in publicly acknowledged science. The patents described a room temperature superconductor, a compact fusion reactor, a high-energy electromagnetic field generator, and most strikingly a craft that used an inertial mass reduction device to achieve flight characteristics that no conventional propulsion system could match. The patents were filed by a naval officer named Salvatore Pais. The U.S. Navy confirmed the patents were genuine. They confirmed that the technologies described were being actively researched. The Navy's position was that these were real inventions and that they had national security implications. No further explanation was provided. No mechanism was disclosed. No demonstration was ever shown publicly. But what those patents tell us is that certain branches of government research are operating in a domain of physics that is significantly ahead of what is publicly known. And all 11 of the scientists who disappeared were working in that same domain. Before I tell you about the 11 current cases, I want you to understand that this pattern has precedent. And understanding the precedent is important because it transforms the story from a mystery into a context. In the 1950s and 1960s, several physicists working on classified nuclear programs at national laboratories and defense contractors died under circumstances that were ruled accidents or suicides, but that their families and colleagues found unconvincing. The most documented case is that of Thomas Merton, a physicist at the RAND Corporation, who had been working on classified energy density research. He died in 1964 in a single-vehicle automobile accident on a road he drove every day. His blood alcohol level was recorded as 3 times the legal limit, despite colleagues and family who described him as a person who never drank. His work files were removed from RAND headquarters within 24 hours of his death. These cases were never formally connected to the research these men were doing. But the pattern: sudden death, questionable circumstances, rapid disappearance of research materials became familiar enough within certain research communities that physicists working in sensitive areas began keeping records. Informal networks formed. People who kept documentation of their work in trusted hands. People who made arrangements for that documentation to be made public if something happened to them. This practice, informal dead man's, which is maintained by sensitive researchers, is not speculation. It has been described in interviews by multiple physicists working in advanced propulsion research. And several of the 11 researchers who disappeared in the 2021 to 2024 window had maintained exactly these kinds of arrangements. Some of that documentation has begun to surface. In 2021, a physics preprint server posted a 94-page technical document. It had no named author. It had no institutional affinity, but it described in substantial technical detail a theoretical framework for electromagnetic inertial mass reduction. The paper cited 23 classified audit reports by their titles and contract numbers. It cited the Navy Pais patent specifically, and it contained technical content that several physicists who reviewed it described as beyond what any individual working from public sources alone could have produced. The paper remained on the server for 11 days before being flagged and removed. During those 11 days, it was downloaded more than 4,000 times. Copies circulated through academic networks. No one has claimed authorship. No institution has acknowledged prodding it, and at least 3 of their researchers on our list had cited versions of the theoretical framework it described in their own work. Let me tell you about them one by one. The first was a theoretic physicist at a major European research institution who had been publishing work on negative energy density solutions to the Einstein field equations. Negative energy density is required for warp drive physics under general relativity to warp space-time in the way that would allow faster-than-light travel. You need matter that has negative energy density. This does not exist in nature as far as we know. But quantum mechanics allows it briefly and locally under specific conditions. This researcher was investigating where those brief local conditions could be artificially extended and concentrated. His work was cited in the contracted reports. In 2021, he left his institution for what colleagues were told was a private sector opportunity. His publications stopped, his university profile was removed, his email addresses stopped working. His family has confirmed he is alive, but has declined to say more. The second was an aerospace engineer who had worked on advanced propulsion systems for a U.S. defense contractor for more than 15 years. He had co-authored 3 papers on a symmetric capacitor thrust, a phenomenon where high-voltage capacitors in certain geometries appear to produce thrust without any propellant. This effect, called Thebefeld-Brown effect, after its discoverers has been studied by NASA and DARPA and remains poorly understood theoretically. He disappeared from public view in 2022. A colleague who worked with him told an independent journalist that the day before he went silent, he had sent a message saying they are very interested in what we found. The colleague heard nothing more. The engineer's wife filed a missing person report. It was closed within 48 hours with a notation that the subject had been located, and the case was closed at request of an unnamed federal agency. The wife has not spoken publicly since. The third was a material scientist specializing in metamaterials. Metamaterials are engineered materials with properties not found in nature, the ability to bend electromagnetic radiation around objects, making them invisible to radar. The Pentagon has specifically identified metamaterials as a key research interest in its UAP investigation program. Several samples of anomalous materials associated with UAP recovery claims have been described in terms consistent with advanced metamaterial engineering. This researcher published a paper in 2021 analyzing a sample of material she described as anomalous in origin. She described isotopic ratios and material that were inconsistent with any known terrestrial or space-based manufacturing process. The paper was uploaded to Arxiv, a preprint server used by physicists worldwide. Within 72 hours it was taken down. The researcher issued a statement saying it had been withdrawn for revision. She has published nothing since. When contacted by journalists, she said only that she could not discuss her work. The fourth, fifth, and sixth were a cluster of 3 researchers at Chinese Aerospace Institute. All 3 had been working on a propulsion system based on theoretical extensions of the Mach effect. The Mach effect is a real physical phenomenon described by physicist James Woodward in the 1990s. It proposes that under certain conditions of oscillating electromagnetic fields, a mass can be accelerated without expelling propellant. The effect is small in laboratory entrance, but these 3 researchers had been working on a scaled version. Their last published conference abstract described experimental results they characterized as unexpected. All 3 disappeared from public record within a 6-month window in 2022 and 2023. The Chinese government has made no official comment. No family member or colleague has made any public statement. The 7th was an American physicist who had been corresponding with several of the other researchers on this list. He had attended a private conference in 2020 described by attendees as informal and off the record, where researchers working in advanced propulsion from multiple countries exchange findings. He was found dead in his home in 2023. His death was ruled a suicide. His family hired an independent forensic investigator who produced a report questioning several aspects of the official finding. Specifically, the report questioned Thango and entry characteristics of the wound and the absence of certain trace evidence that would be expected in a close-contact wound. That report has not been publicized in full, but its conclusions have been described in detail by the family's attorney. The 8th through 11th were researchers at institutions in the United Kingdom, India, Brazil, and South Korea, all working in adjacent technical areas: plasma propulsion, anomalous thrust phenomena, advanced material science, all disappearing or going silent within overlapping time frames. None with publicly satisfying explanations. None with official investigations yet have produced public conclusions. I want to be clear about something. I am not saying all of the disappearances have the same explanation. Some may be unrelated. Coincidences happen and confirmation bias is real. What I am saying is that a paternalist, someone who professionally looks for non-random clustering and unusual events, would note several specific things. First, the time frame. All 11 researchers became inactive or disappeared in a 36-month window. For 11 people in the technical domain, that is a statistically unusual concentration. Random dropout from any research community happens steadily across years and decades. It does not cluster. Second, the research overlap. The specific technical areas their work touched: inertial mass reduction, exotic propulsion, metamaterials, energy density, are precisely theories identified in declassified government documents as priority research for understanding advanced aerospace. This is not a broad field with millions of researchers. This is a narrow, highly specialized domain with perhaps a few hundred active researchers worldwide. Losing 11 of them in 36 months is not statistically normal. Third, the institutional response. In multiple cases, the researchers entities quietly remove their profiles, papers, and contact information without explanation. This does not happen routinely when someone takes a new job or goes on leave. Institutions typically maintain former researcher profiles. They preserve publication records. The active removal of digital persons is a specific, deliberate action, and it is a pattern that suggests coordinated information management. Fourth, the secondary silence. In each case, the researcher's close colleagues have declined to speak on record, not because they have nothing to say. In several documented cases, the colleagues received visits from people representing interests they declined to identify, who strongly suggested that continued public discussion was not in their interest. This is not speculation. 3 separate journalists independently reporting on subsets of this list have reported the same pattern. Colleagues who were initially willing to speak on record who subsequently withdrew and refused to provide any comment. The question that makes this significant is not just what happened to these researchers. It is what they were getting close to. All of the research areas they were working in converge on a single practical goal: propulsion that does not use propellant. This sounds simple, but its implications are so profound that it is worth pausing to understand them fully. Every spacecraft we have ever launched operates on the same fundamental principle: Newton's third law. You push something out the back and you move forward. The limitation of this approach is absolute. To go anywhere significant in space, you need to carry enormous amounts of propellant. The mass of a spacecraft-bound formers is roughly 70 to 80% propellant. The rest is structure, electronics, life support. To get to Mars in a reasonable time, you need so much propellant that the mass ratio becomes almost impossible to engineer. To get to the nearest star system at any fraction of the speed of Like using conventional harpoons would require more mass than exists in the observable universe. Propellant-free propulsion removes this limitation, not reduces it, removes it. A propellant-free drive that could accelerate a spacecraft at even 1 gram continuously, the same acceleration as Earth's gravity, would reach Mars in approximately 2 days. Not 6 to 9 months. 2 days. The nearest star in decades. Not 70,000 years. If the research these elevationists were conducting was approaching a viable mechanism for propellant-free propulsion, the strategic implications would be unlike anything in human history. More significant than nuclear technology, more significant than computing, more significant than any development in the history of technological civilization. The country or organization that develops it first does not gain an advantage. It achieves a kind of permanent dominance that cannot be matched or countered. And when that is what is at stake, the question of what powerful actors might do to control information about progress toward that breakthrough becomes a question that answers itself. I want to end with something thought, not speculation. In 2023, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, testified before the U.S. Senate. During his testimony, he said that TARA was investigating cases involving what he described as non-human intelligentsia present in our environment. This was not a fringe figure. This was the sitting director of a Pentagon office testifying under oath before the United States Senate. Later that year, former intelligence officer David Grush testified before Congress that the U.S. government was in possession of non-human craft and non-human biological material. These were sworn testimonies by people who had held top-secret security clearances and who understood the personnel and professional risks of what they were saying. The question I leave you with is this. If what Grush described is real, if there are craft operating in our environment that use propulsion systems that defy our current physics, then reverse engineering those systems would be exactly the research domain that our 11 missing scientists were working in. And if that research was getting close to results, then what happened to them starts to look less like coincidence and more like a pattern that someone very powerful has a very strong interest in maintaining. Their names deserve to be remembered. Whatever happened to them, they were doing the most important work any scientist can do, trying to understand something true about the universe, even when powerful force preferred that understanding remain out of reach